Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Ruve speaking in Jerusalem. Today is the third day of the month of Sivan, 5780, May 26, 2020. This coming Thursday evening, the festival of Shavuot, one of the three pilgrimage festivals described / commanded in the Holy Torah. We'll be talking about that later. Third day of Sivan. That date has a special mention in Torah. As we know, we're told in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, the first verse, we're told that Israel encamped in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the third month after leaving Egypt. The third month is this month of Sivan. And in verse 19, it goes on to say, chapter 19, verse 9, it goes on to say, and HaShem said to Moshe, behold, I am coming to you in the thickness of the cloud, in order that the people hear when I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever. And Moshe relayed the words to the people, and Moshe relayed the words of the people to HaShem. And HaShem said to Moshe, go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments. They shall be prepared for the third day. For on the third day, HaShem will descend before their eyes and the people upon Mount Sinai. The third day being the third day from this day being the third day of the month of Sivan, meaning that for those last 3 days before receiving Torah on the sixth day of Sivan, the Israelites were in lockdown. They were in special conditions, complete separation between men and women, and the people bathed and people purified themselves in order to be ready for receiving the Torah. And that today is the third day of Sivan. This is the day that those special preparations began in the desert that day. And the holiday of Shavuot is, of course, the holiday of receiving Torah at Mount Sinai, which took place on the sixth day of Sivan. And it's also the holiday of the first fruits. And we are going to be talking a lot about the festival of Shavuot in the second half of our show. But we have some other things to talk about first in this half of the show. Today, the 25th of May, talking here about the Gregorian date, happens to be the 29th anniversary of Mivtza Shlomo, Operation Solomon, which took place in 1991 over a 36-hour period. The Israeli Air Force, Israeli Army using Air Force planes and El Al planes flew in to Israel from Ethiopia, 14,325 Jews, 2,540-mile journey. 34 planes were used during the operation, which was believe it or not, which was a secret operation. An amazing, almost conclusion to the Aliyah, return of the Ethiopian Jews to Israel. Ethiopian Jews, one of the oldest communities, maybe the oldest exilic communities of Jews in the world, because tradition has it that the Jews who made their way into Ethiopia left the land of Israel during the first temple period, making their exile very, very, very long. It was an absolutely astonishing mission. Of course, Ethiopians had been making their way to Israel in large numbers during the 1980s by walking on foot from Ethiopia into Sudan. Not an easy journey, a perilous journey. In fact, many died along the way. Times were tough in Ethiopia, and there was famine, and they were desperate. Israel had officially opened the gates to Aliyah, to the return of the Ethiopian Jews. And so they were making their way into Sudan, and Israel set up, Israel Mossad set up a secret operation in Sudan to bring those Jews into Israel. They would make their way into Sudan and then be in refugee camps, very, 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 very bad conditions. And maybe some of you saw there was recently a Netflix movie, maybe it was a series, about, that was called Operation Moses. The operation took place in the 1980s, and it was aborted when it became, when someone in the Israeli government, I think it was Shimon Peres, as a matter of fact, opened his mouth and made it public, and the Sudanese government immediately stopped cooperating with Israel, and that was the end of that. So in the 1991, as I said, the 14,325 Ethiopian Jews were flown over a 36-hour period to Israel. You know, in the 80s, my wife and I, 1984, were living in Ofra, the community of Ofra in Binyamin, in the Shomron. And we were living in what had been a Jordanian army's barrack. That's from before '67, and each building was divided into 3 separate apartments, and we were in one of the apartments, and there were a couple of rows of these. I mean, this was in Ofra. There were permanent houses. We were new there, and we weren't in a permanent house yet. And one morning we woke up and heard laughter from the neighboring barracks, and didn't recognize the voices at all. And later that morning saw, I don't know, half a dozen teenage Ethiopian girls that had just moved in overnight, because this was during Operation Moses. They were secretly being brought into Israel and given places to live. And that was our first personal contact with Ethiopian Jewry. And so in 1991, at the time, I think there was still only one TV channel in Israel. Of course, it was before the internet. And so in the morning, before you went to work, if you wanted to find out what was going on, you turn on the radio or the TV for the one channel. You know, Israel, who knows what's going on? You might be at war, you might be, who knows? And I remember maybe we first turned on the radio and heard this news, and so we turned on the TV, and it was one of the most dramatic moments in my life to watch us spellbound and you know, a lump in your throat as you're watching hundreds and hundreds of Ethiopian Jews walking out of the plane into Israel. Many of them, maybe all of them, you know, getting on their hands and knees, kissing the ground. It was an astonishing moment. It was, you know, to use the cliche, it was a moment of biblical proportions, no less than that. It was just a prophetic moment, literally a prophecy. And yes, the Jews of Ethiopia are mentioned by our prophets. The prophet Isaiah mentions the Jews in Ethiopia, and they were, you know, one of the diasporas that the prophets said would return. And here they were returning en masse, huge numbers. And in fact, to even make it more dramatic and personal for us, we also had another family, a neighboring family in Ofra, and a newly arrived Ethiopian family who at the time had a few children, young children, but their oldest son, who was also a very young boy, they weren't able to bring with them. They went through Sudan. They weren't able to bring him. He was with the grandparents back in Ethiopia. And of course, at the time, they had no idea when, if ever, they would see their son again. And as I was watching with my wife, or watching this TV, and watching the Ethiopian Jews coming out of the plane, all of a sudden we see our neighbors. They actually were still our neighbors, even though we had moved since then. We both moved. Standing at the foot of the plane, and all of a sudden a young boy runs into their arms. Their son had made it home. He was back home in his parents' arms. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So this was a big day in Israeli history. And 29 years later, it's still commemorated. In fact, earlier, it was last week, there's a special day recognized in Israel as a Memorial Day for the hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know the number of Ethiopian Jews who perished along the way in the 1980s journey from Ethiopia to Sudan. And here we are today, a strong community in Israel. A few members of the Ethiopian community are ministers in the brand new government of Israel. So it's astonishing times here in Israel. I just wanted to mention that. Something else I want to mention. Last Friday, of course, was Jerusalem Day. And many of you may have heard the interview that I conducted with Tom Nisani. Tom is a Temple Mount activist. He started Students for the Temple Mount half a dozen years ago while he was a student in the Hebrew University. And if you heard the interview, you know that he's active in bringing people up to the Temple Mount, religious, non-religious students, people from all walks, and also very active in lobbying the government for change on the Temple Mount, and very active. He's very present in the Israeli Hebrew media on behalf of the Temple Mount. We were talking about last week's court case in which the journalist Arnon Segal and Yehuda Etzion, both Temple Mount activists, petitioned the High Court of Justice here in Israel, saying things have opened up in Israel post-corona, opening up, and in public places, including the Western Wall, including the Machpelah Cave in Hebron, opened up for prayer. Why can't we open it up already for Jewish presence on the Temple Mount? And of course, everybody knows that there was a secret agreement. You may say, if it was secret, how does everybody know? But that's how it works here. Secret agreement between Israel and Jordan that the Jordanian Waqf agreed to close the mount to Muslims on Ramadan, for the month of Ramadan, which is just ending these days. Because during Ramadan, hundreds of thousands of Muslims go up to the Temple Mount, and they closed it because of Corona. But they would only agree to close it, and basically only agree to prevent a disastrous health situation for Muslims and Jews alike, if Israel would agree to close the mount to the much smaller numbers, to my regret, of Jews that go up to the Temple Mount each day. Even though the small amount of Jews that would go up would make it very, very easy for the Jews to go and be able to keep all the restrictions concerning Corona. So anyway, that was the case. Well, open it up for the Jews. And if you heard the interview, you may have known that I commented on what I thought was a remarkably obtuse and vulgar in its cynicism of the answer of the judges, which was, and I quote, "In times of routine, tens of thousands of Muslims visit the Temple Mount. It is precisely the Jewish assent to prayer on the Temple Mount, even in small numbers, that may violate symmetry and reciprocity." That was the judges' response. That's why they said, no, we're not opening it up until it's opened up to the Muslims. And of course, I was shocked, not shocked because I know this is the way our judges think, but pretty disgusted by the fact that they would say anything about symmetry and reciprocity, because there's absolutely no symmetry to how Jews are treated on the Mount, to how many Jews are allowed on the Mount, to the hours that Jews are allowed on the Mount, to what Jews are allowed to do on the Mount, and that which the Muslims are allowed to do on the Mount, which is basically without any restriction, not numbers, not hours, and not even what they do. They can have terror rallies on the Mount. They can have preachers preaching genocide of the Jews on the Mount. That's all kosher in the eyes of our judges. But that Jews should go up in the Mount, even though thousands of Muslims aren't allowed to go on the Mount that day, somehow is a violation of symmetry. Of course, there are many, many days, holidays, Muslim holidays, where Jews aren't allowed on the Mount. Are there Jewish holidays where Muslims aren't allowed? No. So give me a break, judges. But Tom brought up another point, which might have not been as clear to everybody what he was referring to, and it really wasn't the moment then to get into it. But he mentioned the judges also quoted a verse from a classic song. Many of you, I'm sure, know the song "Jerusalem of Gold," Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, a beautiful song which almost became the national anthem of Israel. I say almost because it was proposed and the proposal was rejected, but it's in the hearts of people. It practically is a second national anthem. It's a beautiful song, and it's a beautiful story that surrounds the song, and I'd like to quickly tell that story. 1967, there was a song festival each year, and in this festival, Naomi Shemer, who's a composer and singer, I guess her genre is folk song, and she wrote a song and entered it into the song festival. And the song festival took place on the 15th of May, 1967, right? The Six-Day War broke out on the 6th of June, so this was barely 3 weeks earlier. And it was actually the night after Yom Yerushalayim that year, Yom Ha'atzmaut that year, Israel's Independence Day. And her song, Jerusalem of Gold, was sung, and it won the contest. And here are the words. I'm going to say them in English. The mountain air is clear as wine, and the scent of pines is carried in the breeze of twilight with the sound of bells. And in the slumber of trees and stone, captured in her dream, the city that sits solitary, and in its midst is a wall. Jerusalem of gold and of bronze and of light, behold, I am a violin for all your songs. How the cisterns have dried, the marketplace is empty, and no one frequents the Temple Mount in the old city. And in the caves, in the mountains, winds are howling, and no one descends to the Dead Sea by way of Jericho. Jerusalem of gold, of bronze, and of light, behold, I am a violin for all your songs. But as I come to you to sing today, and to adorn crowns to you, I am the smallest of the youngest of your children, and of the last poet. For your name scorches the lips like the kiss of a seraph. If I forget thee, Jerusalem, which is all gold, Jerusalem of gold and of bronze and of light, behold, I am a violin for all your songs. That was a song. Those were the words that Naomi Shemer entered into the contest, and immediately was a hit, and everybody was singing it. Why was she so mournful about Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem, since the War of Independence until 1967, was in the hands of the Jordanians. They had illegally captured Jerusalem, illegally captured the Shomron, Samaria, and Judea, and annexed it to their country, even though not one country, I think except Britain, recognized their annexation as being legal. And Israel, the Jews who were living in what became Jordanian Jerusalem, were forced out and became refugees in Israel. Of course, Israel didn't make a refugee camp for them. Israel they had houses, and they became upright citizens like everybody else. And whatever it was, 56 synagogues in the old city of Jerusalem were destroyed, literally razed to the ground by the Jordanians. Gravestones in the Mount of Olives cemetery were used to build and used for cisterns, for toilets in Jordanian army camps. What they did was horrific. And this is what the reality was when she wrote the song. So, of course, three weeks later, the Six-Day War, and Israel recaptured, liberated, and united Jerusalem. And the story goes like this, that after the war, when not everybody knew yet that Israel had, the war wasn't over yet, and not everybody knew yet that Israel had liberated the old city, and Naomi Shemer was going to perform her song for a group of soldiers. And rather than announce to them that the old city, that Jerusalem was liberated and reunited, she wrote a final verse. She wrote an additional verse and sang it to the soldiers. And of course, when they heard the verse, they understood. And the verse goes, and this is the final verse, and it says, and in the caves, it says, we have returned to the cisterns and to the marketplace. A ram's horn shofar calls out on the Temple Mount in the old city. That was a reference to the chief rabbi of the IDF who blew a shofar on the Temple Mount and again at the Western Wall upon its liberation. And in the caves in the mountain, thousands of suns shine. We will once again descend to the Dead Sea by way of Jericho. So it's a beautiful song with tremendous significance to Israelis, tremendous historical importance to those who lived through this and to everybody after. It's just a beautiful song, and it means so much to every Jewish heart in the world. And the judge last week in this case had the temerity and the audacity and the chutzpah and just the crudeness to quote the verse that I said before, how the cisterns have dried, the marketplace is empty, and no one frequents the Temple Mount in the old city, and use that to refer to how unfortunate it was for the Muslims that they couldn't go up to the Temple Mount during the month of Ramadan because of the coronavirus. And that's what Tom was referring to in the interview. And again, it was the judges. We have a problem in Israel with judges. They are completely and absolutely disconnected from the Jewish experience, from Jewish consciousness, from Torah consciousness. They're in their own world with their own agenda. Don't provoke me. I can go on a long time. It's a problem, a real problem. And it was chutzpah that they should quote this. And in fact, Naomi Shemer's son reacted and posted that they had a lot of nerve, and if they want to be sympathetic to the pain of the Muslims not going up to the Temple Mount for 1 month, then they could quote their own parents. He said, "Don't quote my mother." Here's the music. Speaking of Naomi Shemer, I'll be right back. Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. It's HaShem. Today is the third day of Sivan, 5780, May 26th, 2020. This coming Thursday evening, the holiday of Shavuot, the Shabbat, Parshat Naso, the second reading in the book of Numbers. If you're in the diaspora and Shavuot is a 2-day observance in the diaspora, then you won't be reading Parshat Naso this Shabbat, but you'll be reading a special Shavuot reading. But here in Israel, Shavuot is 1-day holiday as prescribed by Torah. And on Shabbat, we will be reading a Parshat Naso, which begins Numbers chapter 4, verse 21, concludes chapter 7, verse 89. And briefly, it begins, Parshat Naso begins with a continuation of the census that was being taken of the Levitical families that were going to encamp around the tabernacle. And of course, each different family had a different responsibility for caring for and transporting various vessels and parts of the tabernacle from one encampment location to the next. And then that section of Naso concludes, and then the Parsha begins to talk about the laws of the suspected wife, known as sota in Hebrew. A man has a fit of jealousy upon him. He feels his wife has been unfaithful, and he can bring her to the holy temple, to the tabernacle, where there is an elaborate ritual done in order to determine whether or not she was faithful to her husband or not. A very serious incident, which a husband must have very, very compelling reason to feel the way he feels before he initiates something like this. And in any case, these are the laws of the Sota, and I'm not going to get into it anymore because there are other things that I want to talk about. This is followed by the laws of the Nazir, the Nazirite, a person who makes a vow to HaShem and then abstains from certain things such as eating or drinking anything associated with grapes, whether it's wine or vinegar or raisins or any other product that can be made with grapes, and also will not cut or shave his hair during the duration of his Nazirut, and also will not come in contact with a dead, won't contract ritual impurity from contact with the dead, meaning if a close relative dies, he will not attend or be part of any of the burial process. And if he accidentally does become impure through contact with dead, then there's a whole process. His Nazirut ends, and there's certain offerings that he must bring, and then he can begin again. And those are the laws of the Nazirite. Again, I'm not going to get into that in any more detail. I'd like to focus for a few minutes on what occurs next. A very, very beautiful, beautiful passage. And you're all familiar with it. It's the passage which describes the priestly blessing. I have it in front of me, but I don't have the actual chapter. So you'll have to look for it in Parshat Naso. And it goes like this. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons," those are the Kohanim, saying, "This is how you shall bless the children of Israel, saying to them, May Hashem bless you and watch over you. May Hashem cause his countenance to shine on you and to favor you. May Hashem raise his countenance toward you and grant you peace." And then it says, "They shall bestow my name upon the children of Israel, so that I will bless them." I'm sure everyone is familiar with this blessing, known in English as the priestly blessing, in Hebrew as Birkat Kohanim. And it was said in the Holy Temple every day on the conclusion of the daily offering. The Kohanim would line up in front of the Heichal, in front of the Holy Temple, and stand and bless Israel at large and bless everybody who was gathered there before them. And it's still a blessing that is uttered every day here in Israel in synagogues every morning as part of the morning service when the Shalich Tzibor, when the prayer leader repeats the Shmona Esrei, the standing or 18 prayer benediction, whatever it's called in English. There's a moment there where anyone who is a Kohen, anyone who is a descendant of Aaron, the first Kohen in Israel, first washes their hands, removes their shoes, goes up onto a duch on a raised area, usually before the congregation, stands in front of the Aron, the ark where the Torah scrolls are kept, and recites this blessing. with a talit over their heads and their hands, as some may be familiar with, in a very specific position. Actually, the index and middle finger are held together, and the ring finger and pinky are held together, making a V, and from both hands, and the thumbs are pressed one against the other, and they're held up just above their heads or just above their eye level. And their blessing that they're making is important. As we learned in the last verse that I quoted, they shall bless my name upon the children of Israel so that I will bless them. They are a conduit. The blessing is coming from HaShem via the words and via the way that the Kohanim are standing and holding their hands. And in fact, in the congregation, we avert our eyes. Some people actually cover their heads also with their talit, so as not to be looking directly at the Kohanim as the blessing is emerging through them, and the Shekhinah, God's presence, is emerging through the space, as it were, between their fingers. People lower their eyes or cover their heads with their talit, their prayer shawl. And in the Holy Temple, the actual tetragrammaton, the actual ineffable name of God, the four-letter name of God, which we no longer pronounce, was pronounced by the Kohanim. Today we use a substitute for that name. And it is a remarkable moment in the synagogue, right before uttering the prayer. The Kohanim utter a blessing which basically concludes with they make this blessing of the children of Israel with love, ahava, b'ahava, meaning that the Kohen who's making the blessing has to love all of Israel. He can't bear any grudge in his heart toward anyone, certainly no one who's standing before him. And in fact, if a Kohen feels he can't do this, if he's angry, had a fight, or is holding someone in contempt, God forbid, then he must excuse himself and walk out of the congregation during the priestly blessing, because he can't make a blessing that is supposed to be made with pure and unadulterated love for Israel if he can't feel that love for Israel. So this is a remnant carryover from the time of the Holy Temple, which exists and is practiced today here in Israel every day. And in the diaspora, in most communities, it's only said on holidays. So we have a holiday coming up. So many Jews in America will be hearing it this week. But here in Israel, it's said every day in the morning, and on a fast day, it is said in the afternoon. On holidays also, and on Shabbat, when there's also a Musaf Amidah, Musaf prayer, it is repeated a second time. So we have many occasions every day of the week here in Israel to hear this beautiful blessing. And in fact, also it is a tradition around the world among Jews that a father will bless his children on the Sabbath Eve, usually just before sitting down for the Shabbat meal, the evening meal, right before the Kiddush, the sanctification of Shabbat. A father will place his hands upon his children's heads and give each one a blessing, this particular blessing. And what is the blessing? Traditionally, what is the meaning of the blessing? Traditionally, it's understood as such. May Hashem bless you and keep you. May Hashem bless you with wealth, with prosperity, with the means, with a living, basically, with the ability to put food on your table, and a roof over your head, and food and clothing for your family. That's the definition of wealth, to be able to provide. May God bless you with with the blessing of being able to provide and keep you in health. That refers to health. May his countenance shine on you. That is, may he light up your eyes with, according to Rabbi Natan from the Talmud, light up your eyes with the light of the Shekhinah. Enlighten you. May God enlighten you. May he bless you. May he fill you with his presence. May he, and then it goes on to say, may he raise his countenance toward you and grant you peace. May he raise his countenance toward you with knowledge and understanding, with learning, instruction, and wisdom. May you become full of knowledge and wisdom and understanding and grow closer to Hashem via the intellect. And may his anger pass away from you. May whatever you might have done wrong to anger God forbid, it's clean, off, it's over. And may he grant you peace, peace when you leave and peace when you return, peace in your house, peace without end. And peace is the greatest of blessings, we're told, because all the other blessings truly can't be achieved without the blessing of peace. And this is what I've been saying right now is in a midrashic work called Sifrei, and it's very ancient, and that is the traditional understanding of what this blessing truly means. It's a beautiful blessing, and if you have a chance to be in a synagogue and you're not in Israel, you have a chance to be in a synagogue on the holiday, then perk up your ears, because you don't want to miss it. And you know what? There's no more beautiful blessing you could give to your children. So this Friday evening, before you sit down, bless your children with this blessing. And you know what? Once you do it, you don't want to stop. And your children can be, well, however old they get, your blessing is always a blessing for your children. You never grow tired, and your children never grow tired of being blessed. It is a beautiful thing. This Thursday, Shavuot, the holiday of the first fruits, the holiday of the giving of the Torah. What's it all about? Well, in temple times and in the Torah itself, it is referred to as being the holiday of Shavuot, meaning weeks, because it comes at the conclusion of the 7-week counting of the Omer, and it's also referred to in Torah as the Chag HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits. It's also referred to as the festival of the harvest, because it's the festival which marks the beginning of the wheat harvest, right? The Omer offering, which took place on the second day of Passover, was the beginning of the barley harvest in Israel. Now it's the beginning of the wheat harvest in Israel. So there's a lot of themes and a lot going on. The Torah describes it in detail in the book of Numbers, and in the book of Deuteronomy. And it begins as such. When you come to the land that Hashem, this is the chapter 26, book of Deuteronomy. When you come to the land that Hashem your God is giving you as a heritage, occupying and settling it, you shall take the first of every fruit of the ground produced by the land that Hashem your God is giving you. You must place it in a basket and go to the site that God will choose as the place associated with his name, i.e., the Holy Temple. There you shall go to the Kohen, the priest officiating at that time, and say to him, Today I am affirming to HaShem, your God, that I have come to the land that God swore to our fathers to give to us. The priest shall then take the basket from your hand and place it before the altar of HaShem, your God. You shall then make the following declaration before HaShem, your God. My ancestor was a homeless Aramean. He went down to Egypt and sojourned there with a small number of men. But there he became a great, mighty, and populous nation. The Egyptians were cruel to us and caused us to suffer. They placed harsh slavery upon us. We cried out to HaShem, the God of our fathers, and he heard our voice and saw our suffering, our harsh labor, and our distress. HaShem brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with great visions, signs, and miracles. He brought us to this land. He brought us to this place, giving us this land flowing with milk and honey. I am now bringing the first fruit of the land that HaShem has given me. Then you shall set the basket down before HaShem your God, and then you shall bow down before HaShem your God. You, the Levite and the proselyte in your midst, shall rejoice in all the good that HaShem your God has granted you and your family. That is how it is described in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 26. It is basically an offering, an expression of utter gratitude to HaShem for all that he has done. He made us a mighty nation. Of course, the wandering Aramean is referring to Yaakov, to Jacob, who fled Israel, fled his brother, and went to lived with his father-in-law, the Aramean Lavan, who persecuted him as well. And he basically left there, came back to Israel, and then with his sons went down into Egypt, and then became a mighty nation. God brought them out. And this is, if there is one holiday in Israel that is a holiday, an expression of gratitude and appreciation for the land of Israel, it is Shavuot, because that's what this is all about, these first fruits, that God gave us this land, and God said, work this land. It's bountiful. Make it be bountiful for you. It's filled with blessing. And so we're instructed, and the instructions are very clear in the Mishnah, which describes it, that when a farmer sees the first fruits, the beginnings of the very first fruits of all of his different produce, and we're talking about the 7 species of Israel, then he is to tie a ribbon around the first pomegranate, around the first fig, and as it grows and develops, when the time comes and Shavuot approaches, he then takes that fig, puts it in a basket along with his other first fruits, and brings it as an offering. And the Shavuot is the beginning of the season for bringing first fruit offerings. Of course, not everything is ripe and ready to be brought on Shavuot. First fruits can be brought throughout the summer, up through Sukkot, but the particular ceremony that's described above with this particular declaration is only takes place on Shavuot. We mentioned in an earlier Temple Talk show that Shavuot actually a one-day holiday, but we're allowed during times of the temple 7 days to actually arrive and bring these first fruits and perform this ceremony, because it's a lot to ask of everybody to actually get to the temple and get in and perform this all in one single day. That was, yes, a necessity for bringing the Passover offering, but here in Shavuot, there was actually a 7-day period during which these offerings could be brought, and this ceremony would be performed. If you brought your first fruit offerings after that, it was without this particular ceremony. Descriptions in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, of the holiday are just beautiful. Anybody who wants to learn more go to our website. We have an entire section about Shavuot, fully illustrated, which hopefully brings to life what the experience was then. Of course, pilgrims would come from all directions up to Jerusalem. Masses of pilgrims would gather in certain cities along the way and sleep overnight under the stars and rise up early in the morning so they could continue their journey. There would usually be an appointed leader who would, in the morning, at the break of dawn, cry out, "Get up and let us go up to Zion, to the house of HaShem our God," quoting from Jeremiah. And the people would rise up and continue to Jerusalem to enjoy, participate in Shavuot. Here's the music. I'm going to have to stop here. I'm wishing everybody a very, very healthy, a very happy Shavuot. There's so much more to talk about. We've run out of time. Chag Sameach. Have a very good holiday. Temple Talk.